I thought I had married a stranger. Then I found proof he had been quietly protecting pieces of my life long before I ever became his wife. The first night inside Sterling Manor felt nothing like a wedding night. It felt like I had accidentally wandered into a museum where every room belonged to someone else. The house was silent except for the distant ticking of a grandfather clock somewhere beyond the marble hallways. I stood barefoot near the window of my new bedroom, staring at the rain sliding down the glass. 12 hours earlier, I had signed a marriage certificate beside Nathan Sterling. 12 hours earlier, I had promised my future to the one man who had always made me uneasy. Nathan was not cruel. That would have been easier to understand. He was simply impossible to read. He rarely smiled, rarely spoke more than necessary. Every conversation with him felt like standing in front of a locked door. The Sterling family called him reserved. The media called him mysterious. My friends called him intimidating. Secretly, I agreed with all of them. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. I turned toward the door. Nathan stood there, still wearing dark slacks and a white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled neatly to his forearms. "I wanted to make sure you were comfortable," he said. That was all. No awkward attempt at romance. No expectation. Just a simple question. "I am fine," I replied. He nodded once. "Good night, Olivia." Then he left. The door closed quietly behind him. I released a breath I had not realized I was holding. The strange thing was that Nathan always did that. He appeared, said something considerate, then disappeared before I could decide what to think about him. Around midnight, sleep refused to come. I wandered through the enormous house hoping movement would settle my nerves. Most of the hallways were dark except for small wall lights casting warm pools across polished wood floors. Everything looked elegant, perfect, untouched. I turned a corner near the east wing and noticed a door slightly open. Curiosity pulled me closer. The room beyond was dimly lit by a single lamp. At first glance it looked like a private study. Bookshelves covered the walls. Framed photographs sat on tables. Nothing unusual. Then I noticed one picture. My picture. I froze. The photograph showed me standing outside my college graduation 6 years earlier, smiling beneath a blue cap and gown. My heart skipped. Slowly I stepped inside. Another photo rested beside it. Then another. Then another. A charity event. My first professional award. A newspaper clipping featuring a project I had organized. Every image belonged to a different chapter of my life. My pulse thundered in my ears. I moved deeper into the room. On one shelf sat a scholarship announcement I had received years ago. Beside it was a program from a hospital fundraiser where I had volunteered. On the desk rested a small silver bracelet I had lost almost 4 years earlier. I stared at it in disbelief. None of this made sense. This was not coincidence. This was history. My history. Carefully preserved. My hand trembled as I opened a nearby drawer. Inside lay dozens of folders, each labeled with a year, each containing pieces of a life I thought nobody had noticed. Then I heard footsteps approaching from the hallway. My heart stopped, because suddenly there was only one question that mattered. Why had Nathan Sterling been collecting fragments of my life for years before he ever married me? The footsteps stopped just outside the study door. Every muscle in my body locked. For one irrational second, I considered hiding behind the desk like a child caught doing something she should not have been doing. Instead, I carefully closed the drawer and stepped away from it. The door opened. Nathan stood there. Neither of us spoke. The silence stretched between us while warm lamplight filled the room. His eyes moved from my face to the open folders on the desk, then to the photographs surrounding us. He knew exactly what I had seen. What surprised me was that he did not look angry. He looked tired. Not physically tired. Emotionally tired. Like a man who had just watched a secret he carried for years finally step into the light. "You found this room," he said quietly. I crossed my arms. "You say that like it was inevitable." A faint smile almost appeared. Almost. Maybe it was. That answer only made my confusion worse. I looked around the study again. The photographs. The documents. The bracelet. The evidence of years I never knew existed. "Nathan, why?" The question escaped before I could stop it. His expression became unreadable again. "It is late, Olivia. Do not do that. He paused. Do what? Change the subject. Rain tapped softly against distant windows somewhere inside the massive house. Nathan looked at the bookshelf behind me instead of directly at me. You should get some rest. I laughed once. The sound held no amusement. I just discovered an entire room filled with pieces of my life, and your advice is sleep? His jaw tightened slightly. Not with anger. With restraint. There was a difference. Nothing in this room is dangerous. The answer immediately bothered me. I never said it was dangerous. You were thinking it. The frustrating part was that he was right. I had been thinking it. Not because of what I found, but because I did not understand it. People understood what they expected. This felt impossible. I picked up the silver bracelet from the desk. The tiny moon charm hanging from it caught the light. I lost this 4 years ago. Nathan looked at it. I know. How? His eyes finally met mine. You left it after a fundraiser. My heart skipped. You were there. Yes. The answer came so easily it stunned me. I searched my memory. Hundreds of guests. Sponsors. Volunteers. Donors. I could not remember seeing him. I never saw you. Something flickered across his face. Sadness, perhaps. I know. The room felt smaller suddenly. The air heavier. Nathan, were you following me? The question hung between us. For the first time all night, genuine surprise crossed his features. Not offended surprise.
Heurte surprise.
A subtle difference. He looked away for a moment before answering. No. One simple word. Yet somehow it carried absolute certainty. Then explain this. I gestured toward the photographs. Toward the folders. Toward years of unanswered questions. Nathan remained silent so long that I thought he might refuse to answer altogether. Then he took a slow breath. Some people collect trophies. His voice was barely above a whisper. I collected moments. I stared at him. The answer made no sense. And somehow it made too much sense at the same time. Before I could ask another question, his phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen. The small amount of warmth in his expression disappeared instantly. What is it? I asked. Nathan looked at the message once. Then again. When he finally lifted his eyes back to mine, something had changed. Olivia, he said quietly, there is something about our marriage that you were never supposed to find out. The words settled over the room like a sudden drop in temperature. I stared at Nathan, trying to decide whether I had heard him correctly. What do you mean? He slipped the phone back into his pocket. The screen went dark. Whatever message had appeared there seemed important enough to change the direction of the entire conversation. Nathan. My voice sharpened. What was I never supposed to find out? He remained silent for several seconds. That silence was becoming a pattern. A frustrating one. Outside, rain continued tapping against the windows while the old clock somewhere in the house marked another passing minute. Finally, he walked toward the desk and rested one hand against its polished surface. This marriage was never supposed to happen this way. I folded my arms. That answers absolutely nothing. A faint breath escaped him. Not quite a laugh. More like the sound of someone preparing to tell a truth they had avoided for a long time. Do you remember the Sterling Foundation Gala 3 years ago? The question caught me off guard. I searched my memory. Hundreds of events blurred together after years of working in public relations and event management. Then one specific evening surfaced. A luxury hotel ballroom. Crystal chandeliers. Charity donors. Corporate executives. Yes, I said slowly. I coordinated the guest experience. Nathan nodded once. You also lost the contract 2 days later. My eyes widened. How do you know that? He looked at me as though the answer should have been obvious by now. Because I was there. Confusion twisted inside me. Nathan, there were 500 people there. No. I never saw you. His expression softened. I saw you. The room became very quiet. He moved toward one of the shelves and removed a thin folder. Unlike the others, this one was not hidden away. It looked worn from being opened repeatedly. He handed it to me. My hands hesitated before taking it. Inside were documents I immediately recognized. Rejection letters. Budget reports. Emails. records connected to one of the most difficult periods of my career. After losing that contract, my company had nearly collapsed. I remembered crying alone in my apartment, convinced my future was slipping away. Then, unexpectedly, a new opportunity had appeared. A larger client. A better contract. The project that eventually transformed my entire career. I looked up. Why do you have these? Nathan met my gaze. Because I was the reason you got the second opportunity. My heart stopped. What? The original contract cancellation was not your fault. His voice remained calm. The vendor made mistakes and blamed your team. I found out after reviewing internal reports. I stared at him. The memory felt suddenly unstable. Like a photograph someone had quietly altered. The new client requested your company specifically. He paused. At my recommendation. I could not speak. The revelation was too large. Too unexpected. Why? The question escaped as barely more than a whisper. Nathan looked away briefly before answering. Because watching someone lose something they did not deserve to lose felt wrong. I wanted to believe that explanation. Yet it felt incomplete. Every answer tonight seemed to uncover 3 new questions. Then my eyes drifted toward the folders lining the shelves. Years of folders. Years of records. Years of moments. Slowly, a realization began forming. Not sudden. Not dramatic. Just terrifyingly clear. This was not one favor, was it? Nathan said nothing. That silence became the answer. My pulse quickened. The scholarship. Silence. The fundraiser. Silence. The job opportunity. Silence. I took a step back. Nathan, how many times have you been in my life without me knowing? His expression changed then. For the first time all night I saw genuine vulnerability behind the calm exterior. And when he finally answered, his voice carried a sadness that made my chest ache. More times than you would ever believe. For a moment neither of us moved. The rain outside had softened to a gentle whisper against the windows, but inside the study my thoughts were louder than ever. More times than you would ever believe. Nathan's words refused to leave my head. I looked around the room again. Every photograph. Every document. Every carefully preserved memory. What had seemed unsettling an hour ago now felt almost impossible to comprehend. Why? I asked again. My voice sounded weaker this time. Not angry. Not accusing. Just confused. Nathan lowered himself into the chair behind the desk and stared at the floor for several seconds before answering. Because it was easier than telling you the truth. The answer made no sense. What truth? His eyes lifted to mine. That I noticed you. My chest tightened unexpectedly. The simplicity of the statement somehow made it more powerful. At a charity event? I asked. Before that. He shook his head. Much earlier. I stood frozen. How much earlier? A faint smile touched the corner of his mouth. Sud. Distant. The first time I saw you, you were 22 years old. My breath caught. 22. 7 years ago. I tried to remember where I had been at 22. College classes. Part-time jobs. Endless stress about tuition and rent. That is impossible, I whispered. We never met. No. His expression softened. We did not. The answer only deepened the mystery. Nathan stood and walked toward one of the shelves. From a lower drawer he removed a thin envelope. The paper looked old. Carefully preserved. He handed it to me. Inside was a scholarship application. My scholarship application. The same one that had allowed me to finish my degree. I stared at the familiar pages. The essays. The recommendation letters. My own signature. How do you have this? Nathan leaned against the bookshelf. Because I reviewed the final candidates. I looked up sharply. You were on the selection committee? He nodded. Unofficially. Suddenly I remembered the scholarship. Foundation. Sterling Educational Trust. One of the largest private education charities in the state. At the time, I had been grateful beyond words when I received the award. I never knew who helped make the decision. You chose me. I asked quietly. Your application chose itself. His answer came immediately. You earned every dollar. For some reason, that hurt more than if he had admitted to helping me. Because there was sincerity in his voice. Absolute sincerity. I looked down at the papers again. The edges had been worn from being handled. More than once. More than a dozen times, probably. Nathan had kept this for 7 years. 7 years. My pulse quickened. Nathan, this is not normal. He laughed softly. The sound surprised me. I know. Then why keep all of it? His smile disappeared. Silence settled between us once again. Then he walked toward the window and looked out into the darkness beyond the glass. When he finally spoke, his voice was almost too quiet to hear. Because every time I thought about forgetting you, something happened that made it impossible. My heart skipped. Before I could process the meaning behind those words, another voice suddenly echoed from the hallway outside the study. Female. Sharp. Familiar. Nathan, tell me it is not true. We both turned toward the door. And for the first time that night, I saw genuine alarm flash across Nathan Sterling's face. The study door opened before either of us could respond. Vanessa Whitmore stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. She looked immaculate despite the late hour, dressed in a cream-colored designer suit that probably cost more than my first car. Her eyes moved immediately to me, then to the photographs surrounding the room, then back to Nathan. The color drained from her face. You showed her? She asked. Nathan's expression hardened. I did not have to. Vanessa laughed once. The sound was sharp and humorless. Of course. She found it herself. I stood frozen between them, feeling as though I had accidentally walked into a conversation that began years before I arrived. Somebody want to explain what is happening? My voice cut through the tension. Neither answered. Immediately, Vanessa crossed her arms. You really do not know? She asked. The question irritated me instantly. Clearly not. She glanced toward Nathan. Interesting. Nathan stepped forward. Enough. The single word carried more authority than any raised voice could have. Vanessa looked at him for a long moment. Then something shifted behind her eyes. Not fear. Frustration. The frustration of someone watching a carefully built plan begin to crack. You should have told her years ago, she said quietly. My pulse quickened. Years ago. Not months. Not weeks. Years. Nathan remained silent. Vanessa looked at me again. Do you remember the marketing position in Chicago? The question caught me completely off guard. What? 5 years ago. She tilted her head slightly. The job offer that disappeared 2 days before your interview. I blinked. The memory returned immediately. It had been a major opportunity, one I desperately needed at the time. Then the company abruptly canceled the position. At least that was what I had been told. What about it? Vanessa's gaze shifted toward Nathan. Ask your husband. The room became very still. I turned toward him. Nathan closed his eyes briefly. That reaction alone told me everything. Nathan. My voice softened. What is she talking about? He opened his eyes again. The position was not canceled. My stomach dropped. What? Vanessa laughed again. This time there was genuine bitterness in it. There it is. I stared at Nathan. You stopped me from taking the job? He did not immediately answer. The silence felt endless. Finally he nodded once. Yes. I could barely process what I was hearing. Why would you do that? Nathan looked away. For the first time since I had known him, he appeared uncertain. Because the company was about to collapse. I frowned. What? Internal fraud investigations had already started. He met my eyes. The entire division shut down less than 6 months later. Confusion replaced some of my anger. I remembered the disappointment, the frustration. But I also remembered hearing years later that the company had disappeared. At the time I never connected the two events. How would you even know that? Nathan gave me a look that answered the question before he spoke. Sterling Capital owned part of the company. My thoughts spun faster. One revelation after another. One hidden connection after another. Then Vanessa stepped closer. Tell her the rest. Nathan's jaw tightened. Vanessa. Tell her. Her voice dropped. Or I will. The air felt suddenly heavier. Nathan stared at her for several seconds. Then he looked back at me. There was resignation in his eyes now. a quiet acceptance that some truths could no longer remain hidden. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, almost gentle. Olivia, the reason our marriage happened has nothing to do with business. My heart skipped. Then why did it happen? Nathan held my gaze. Because I asked for it. For a second, I thought I had misunderstood him. The words sounded too simple to carry the weight they obviously did. Because I asked for it. I stared at Nathan while the study seemed to shrink around us. The photographs. The folders. The years of unanswered questions. Suddenly all of them felt connected by a thread I could not quite see. What does that mean? I asked quietly. Nathan did not look away. It means the marriage was my idea. My pulse hammered in my ears. Across the room, Vanessa folded her arms and leaned against the doorway. She looked less surprised than I did. As though she had been waiting years for this conversation to happen. Tell her everything, she said. Nathan ignored her. His attention remained fixed on me. When the board proposed a strategic marriage arrangement, your name appeared on a list of candidates connected to several foundation projects. I frowned. A list? Yes. The answer felt absurd. And out of all the women in the state, you chose me? A shadow of a smile appeared and disappeared from his face. Immediately, the room fell silent. I did not know what to do with that answer. Part of me wanted to be angry. Another part wanted to understand. Why? Nathan exhaled slowly. Because I already knew who you were. The honesty in his voice made my chest tighten. Vanessa shook her head. That is the polite version. Nathan's jaw tightened. Vanessa. She ignored the warning. He spent years refusing every relationship his family suggested. Every single one. My eyes shifted between them. Years. Years, Vanessa repeated. Until your name appeared. I looked back at Nathan. He said nothing, which somehow confirmed everything. The realization felt impossible. This man had been part of my life for years without my knowledge. Not as a stranger watching from the shadows. Not as someone controlling my choices. But as someone quietly removing obstacles, opening doors and disappearing before I could ever know he had been there. Why never tell me? I asked. Nathan walked toward the window. Rain still traced soft lines across the glass. Because I never wanted you to feel obligated. His reflection stared back at him from the dark pane. The moment someone learns they owe you something, every interaction changes. I remembered the scholarship, the career opportunity, the fundraiser, the countless invisible connections. Maybe he was right. If I had known, I would have spent years wondering whether my achievements were truly mine. You let me think you did not care. My voice cracked slightly. Nathan closed his eyes for a brief moment. I know. Those two words carried more regret than any explanation could have. Vanessa pushed away from the doorway. For the first time that night, she looked tired instead of composed. You are both asking the wrong question. Neither of us responded. She looked directly at me. You keep asking why he chose you. Then she looked at Nathan. The real question is why he believed you would never choose him. The silence that followed felt heavier than anything else that had been said. Nathan's expression changed instantly. Not anger. Not embarrassment. Pain. Genuine pain. I felt my breath catch. Because suddenly I realized there was still a piece of this story missing. A piece neither of them had revealed. Vanessa moved toward the hallway and paused at the door. Ask him what happened 6 years ago in Boston. Then she walked away. The door clicked shut behind her. I slowly turned back toward Nathan. His face had gone completely still. And for the first time since entering the study, he looked like a man afraid of the truth. The study felt impossibly quiet after Vanessa left. Even the rain seemed distant now. Boston. 6 years ago. The words echoed through my mind while Nathan stood near the window, staring into the darkness beyond the glass. For the first time since I had known him, he looked uncertain, vulnerable, human. What happened in Boston? I asked softly. His shoulders rose and fell with a slow breath. Several seconds passed before he answered. You were not supposed to know about that either. I almost laughed. There were apparently many things I was never supposed to know. Nathan. My voice carried more patience than I felt. Please. He turned toward me. The guarded expression he wore so often was gone. In its place was something sadder. 6 years ago, I attended a conference in Boston. I frowned. I was there too. His eyes met mine. I know. The answer immediately tightened my chest. Memories surfaced. A convention center near the harbor. Endless networking events. Career workshops. A week that had changed the direction of my professional life. You saw me there? He nodded. More than once. I sank slowly into a chair beside the desk. The room suddenly felt unsteady. Nathan, how is that possible? He walked toward one of the shelves and removed a framed photograph. He handed it to me carefully. The image showed a crowded conference ballroom. Hundreds of people filled the room. At first I did not understand why he was showing it to me. Then I noticed a familiar face near the center. Mine. I was standing beside a presentation booth, laughing at something someone had said. My breath caught. Who took this? Nathan hesitated. I did. The answer should have alarmed me. Instead it made me strangely emotional. Because there was nothing secretive about the image. Nothing inappropriate. It looked exactly like what it was. A single moment preserved because it mattered to someone. Why? I whispered. Nathan sat across from me. Because I had finally decided to talk to you. My heart skipped. What? A faint smile touched his face. Painful. Fragile. I spent 3 days convincing myself to walk across that room. I stared at him. The idea felt
Impossible.
This was Nathan Sterling. The man who negotiated billion-dollar acquisitions without hesitation. The man who intimidated entire boardrooms simply by entering them. You were nervous? The smile deepened slightly. Terrified. I could hardly believe it. Why? His eyes never left mine. Because by then I already knew I cared too much. Silence settled between us. Heavy and warm at the same time. Then the smile disappeared. On the final night, I saw you leaving the hotel. My pulse quickened. Leaving with someone. Suddenly I remembered. A colleague. Daniel Harper. We had shared a taxi to the airport because our flights departed around the same time. Nothing more. Nothing less. Realization hit me instantly. You thought we were together. Nathan looked away. The silence confirmed everything. I closed my eyes briefly. One misunderstanding. One wrong assumption. 6 years of consequences. When I opened them again, Nathan was staring at the photograph in my hands. That night, he said quietly, I convinced myself I was already too late. And for the first time, I began to understand how two people could spend years caring about each other, while living entirely different versions of the same story. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The photograph rested in my hands while 6 years of misunderstandings slowly rearranged themselves into a different truth. Outside, the rain had finally stopped. The windows reflected only darkness and the faint glow of distant garden lights. Nathan sat across from me, calm on the surface, but I could see the strain in his eyes now. The effort of carrying a secret for so many years. Daniel was a coworker, I said quietly. Nathan looked up. What? The man in Boston. I swallowed. We shared a ride to the airport because our flights left around the same time. We were never dating. The silence that followed felt almost unreal. Nathan stared at me as if he was trying to decide whether he had heard correctly. Then he laughed once. Softly. Not because anything was funny. Because the truth was somehow more painful than the mistake. He looked away and rubbed one hand across his jaw. I spent 6 years believing otherwise. My chest tightened. Why did you never ask? The question escaped before I could stop it. Nathan's smile disappeared. Because I had no right. I frowned. No right. You were living your life. His voice remained steady. You were building a career. Building a future. The last thing I wanted was to become another wealthy man who thought he could insert himself into someone else's story whenever he pleased. I stared at him. Every answer he gave seemed to reveal a version of him I had never known. Not cold. Not distant. Just careful. Painfully careful. So instead you stayed away. He nodded. Until the marriage proposal. The room became quiet again. My gaze drifted around the study. The photographs no longer felt unsettling. They felt sad. Evidence of years that might have been different if either of us had known the truth. Nathan. My voice softened. Did you really keep all of this? His eyes followed mine around the room. Not all of it. That answer surprised me. What do you mean? He stood and walked toward a cabinet built into the far wall. For a moment he hesitated. Then he opened it. Inside were dozens of neatly organized boxes. More photographs. Event programs. Newspaper clippings. Small reminders of ordinary moments. My breath caught. This was not a collection. It was a history. A quiet record of years spent caring about someone from a distance. Nathan looked almost embarrassed standing beside it. I told myself I would throw everything away eventually. I looked at him. But you never did. He shook his head. No. Something shifted inside me then. Not sudden love. Not instant forgiveness. Something deeper and quieter. Understanding. For years I had feared Nathan because I did not know him. I mistook silence for indifference. Distance for arrogance. Control for coldness. Yet standing here now, surrounded by proof of his choices, I realized something extraordinary. Every important thing he had done for me had happened when there was no possibility of recognition. No reward. No credit. Just kindness. Then Nathan reached into one of the boxes and removed a sealed envelope. The paper looked old. Worn at the edges. He held it carefully before offering it to me. What is this? I asked. His expression softened in a way I had never seen before. The letter I wrote after Boston. My heart stopped. You wrote me a letter? Nathan nodded slowly. And tomorrow morning, if you still want the truth, I think you should finally read it. The envelope sat on my nightstand for the rest of the night. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw photographs, scholarship papers, conference halls, and years of moments that suddenly looked different than they had 24 hours earlier. By sunrise, pale gold light filled the room. The storm had passed. Everything outside looked clean and new. My hands trembled slightly as I picked up the envelope. The seal had never been broken. Slowly I opened it. Inside was a single letter written in Nathan's handwriting. The date in the corner stopped me immediately. 6 years ago. Boston. My heart pounded as I began to read. The words were simple. Honest. There were no grand declarations. No dramatic promises. He wrote about seeing me work harder than anyone else at the conference. About admiring the way I treated people who could offer nothing in return. About spending 3 days trying to introduce himself and failing every time. Then came the sentence that made tears blur the page. I do not know if our paths will ever cross again. But meeting you reminded me that success means very little if it costs you the ability to recognize goodness when you find it. I closed my eyes. The letter continued. He wished me happiness. He wished me success. And then, at the very end, he wrote something that changed everything. If you are already happy with someone else, I hope he knows how lucky he is. That was it. No expectation. No request. No attempt to influence my future. Just quiet acceptance. For several minutes I sat alone holding the letter. Then I realized something extraordinary. Nathan never sent it. He never used his influence to force his way into my life. He never demanded recognition for anything he had done. Every choice he made had preserved my freedom, even when it cost him personally. Later that morning, I found him standing on the east terrace overlooking the gardens. The sunlight reflected across the fountains below. He looked exactly as he always had. Calm. Composed. Yet now I could finally see what existed beneath the surface. Years of restraint. Years of patience. Years of caring without expectation. Nathan turned when he heard my footsteps. His eyes immediately found the letter in my hand. Neither of us spoke at first. We did not need to. You never sent it, I said quietly. He nodded once. No. Why? A faint smile touched his face. Because by the time I finished writing it, I believed the answer already belonged to someone else. I shook my head slowly. Daniel was never my boyfriend. The smile faded. Not from sadness. From disbelief. The kind that arrives when a person realizes how much of life was built on a misunderstanding. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then I stepped closer. You spent years protecting opportunities that helped shape my future. His gaze never left mine. You earned every one of them. You spent years believing I chose someone else. He exhaled softly. Yes. I looked at the man I had feared. The man I thought was distant. The man I believed barely tolerated this marriage. And suddenly the truth felt almost overwhelming. He had been choosing me for years. Quietly. Consistently. Without asking for anything in return. Tears filled my eyes. Nathan. My voice trembled. Why did you never tell me? The morning breeze moved gently through the gardens below. Nathan's expression softened in a way I would never forget. Not because it was dramatic. Because it was honest. Because loving you mattered more than being loved back. The words settled between us. Simple. Unprotected. Real. And in that moment, I realized the man I feared most had spent years becoming the safest place I had ever known.